The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. It's 5 p.m., July 18th, 2023. We are at the City Hall Council Chambers here in the city of Cape Canaveral, Florida for our budget workshop. I call this meeting to order. At this time, Councilmember Davis, would you please lead us in the pledge? Thank you. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Davis? Here. Councilmember Kellum?
Here.
Mayor Morrison?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Raymond?
Here.
Councilmember Willis?
Here.
Thank you. This is the public participation portion of the meeting. Anyone who's listening live online, please raise your hand. I will recognize you. And anyone here who'd like to speak, this is a workshop. If we ask that you do, please fill out a comment card. If you don't have one now, you can fill it out after. But if anyone would like to speak, now is the time. Please come forward or maybe raise your hand and let me know. I can give you a little bit of time. Anyone here like to speak? Okay. Seeing none and seeing none online, we'll go ahead and close the public participation portion of the meeting. This time, we're going to go into our discussion for the workshop for the proposed fiscal year 2023-2024 budget and the 5-year capital improvement plan. Before I do that, I just want to stop and say thank you all for coming and being a part of this, and the city staff, everyone who's been involved with this budget. And I think it makes sense to allow our city manager and his team help kick this off. If you're ready.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also want to thank John and Jenny and his whole staff for putting together this budget. It was a lot of work. It always is every year, but they do an excellent job. I'm just going to give some high-level overviews here, and John and Jenny can fill in some other items too. But what we want to accomplish tonight is establish the tentative proposed millage rate. As you recall from previous years, once you establish that rate, you cannot go above that in future meetings. You can go below that in future meetings. So what we establish here tonight is not necessarily set in stone. It's a starting point. So keeping that in mind, what we propose is a millage rate of 3.5716. This budget, the highlights overviews are there is no new debt. The council has not added any new debt since we bought the building next door. We are dealing with impacts of inflation. Chiefly, last year, City Council approved a significant increase in employee wages, which was greatly appreciated. And I'm so glad to see the employees here tonight. Thank you all for showing up. That support means a lot to your council and me. The adjustments, we feel like we're nearing the end of it, but this budget does propose a 2% additional cost of living adjustment for the city employees. Melinda is here and she can talk about that, and hopefully that'll be the last one we have to do for some years. We have some other increases, though, that are being addressed in this budget. We've had our workers' comp increase by 25%. Our property insurance has increased by 53%, significantly. We did include an IT staff position this year. You may recall last year we had it in the budget, but we decided to push it back a year, so that's in this budget. We put in what the council requested for the volunteer appreciation dinner. That's back in here after, I think, probably 8 years or 9 years away from having that. We've got some grants programs, CRA that have increased by $25,000 or $50,000. I want to talk about some of the impacts of the contingency. And last year we had a significant discussion about contingency and why it needs to be so healthy. And there's some examples that I'm going to ask John to go through. But we're also proposing a healthy contingency again this year. But we're funding everything City Council wants. We've got the level of service will not decrease with this budget. And we've included all of the programs that City Council approved at the strategic planning retreat, which was just, I think it was formalized last month or the month before, I think it was. Those projects are all in here. according to the years that they're supposed to be done in. There are two unbudgeted items that are going to appear in the regular meeting this evening, and that's a grant request, match, and there's also Veterans Memorial Park cost overruns. Neither one of those are reflected in this budget because they came to light after the budget was prepared. But we feel like we can absorb those impacts in this budget, coming off the contingency early off in the game. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John and Jenny to fill in some more details, and then you can stop, of course, council, at any point and ask any questions. And John.
Yes, so if council would just refer to this sheet initially that I just gave you. You know, this process is going to be very similar to what we did last year. We find ourselves, I think, in a much better position than we were last year, but the format that I gave you will be easily to understand because it goes kind of with the same sequence as last year. Of course, like the city manager said, 3.5716, that's where we land when we put this budget together, and everything that council wanted that's a strategic retreat voted on, and all the other elements are contained within. We end at 3.5716. There's some bullets under there. Well, what does the 3.5716, what is the impact of that? Well, there is, because we're at 3.5716, that's going to reduce the contingency. What I want to remind council is that the contingency last year in the budget, which we were concerned about, was about $302,000, okay? And that was last year. Now, this year, giving council what they've asked for in terms of the projects and everything takes us down to $239,000. I'll bring this up since the city manager brought it up. In the event that the agenda items that need to be added to the budget, or if you're willing to add it to the budget, if those things are added for the general fund, and the contingency will further be reduced to $169,000. So it's coming down, but what staff's doing here is we feel like we have a realistic proposed millage that we can, if council could set tonight, and we could work with that. Now, moving on to the next part of your handout there, the impacts are significant if we don't stay at the 3.5716. If we went to rollback at 3.2517, then the general fund's going to take a $570K hit, which means council has to go in and do what they did last year. They'll have to determine what do you not want in this budget. If we went to the middle of the road, 3.4117 is what council did last year, it still required us to remove almost, I believe, $500,000 from the budget, and we were able to do it. So there's things that didn't get done, that wouldn't have got done this present year because we went with the middle of the road. But even middle of the road will hit us for $285,000, which again, then we'd have to determine what don't we want. Well, with that being said, this budget represents what council does want. And council, to get council what they initially wanted, gets us at the 3.5716. And if you look below there, there's an important note there. And I mean, and if the county approves this, when it comes to the CRA, when the county general fund millage is less than the city's, there was a time, not so many years ago, that the county matched the CRA for the city. But those days are gone. And what they've done now in the last 4, 5, 6 years is basically they base their contribution, their TIF share to the CRA on what their millage is. And in this case, it looks like the county's going to go with a 3.0486 for their general fund. If they do that, how does that affect Cape Canaveral? Well, it affects us by $191,000. which means that the county will give us 191,000 less based on the millage that we're introducing at the 3.5716.
In the CRA.
That's for the CRA. So the CRA will take a hit because that's how the county computes that. And I will tell you, when the county instituted this, and I'm just saying 4 or 5 years ago, whatever, I'll never forget the day where they had already given us the money and they changed the rules. And then in December of that year, we had to write a $102,000 check back to the county because the county went to the cities saying, hey, guess what? We're going by this now. We're going by our millage because they started to figure out, well, how could we save money in the CRA? Well, we're giving the cities money that technically, why are we honoring their higher millages? So that's a little history for you, just to let you know. Okay? And then just what I did for you there at the bottom, the ARPA summary, just kind of shows you that going forward in this upcoming budget year, you see we're going to start to spend some of our ARPA money. And the center ditch improvement, the central basin, and the clarifiers. Tonight, not to jump ahead, but you'll see an agenda item tonight on the purchase of the ladder truck for the fire department. And Chief Sergeant had informed us, we were very lucky that we did get a grant that he got from the state, which reduces the cost of us paying $800,000, our share, to $432,000, if I got that right, which is absolutely fantastic. And you'll see that in the council meeting. But all in all, that's the main crux of everything that I want to bring up. I also wanted to bring up just a few things when it comes to how does the millage affect property taxes, and then I'll turn it over to Jenny if she's got anything. Well, if you stuck with the rate that we're presenting on a $100,000 property, taxes would go up $13.94. If it's $250,000 property, $34.85. If you have a 300K property, $41.82. And if you have a 500K, it's about $70. So not actually drastic increases. And I think when you look at those increases and when you look at what the city has done overall on everything that's happened in this city with the MGF and the Cape Center going to be opening and other improvements to the city, it's probably a very small price to pay for the quality of life that's improved in Cape Canaveral. So that's all I've got. Jenny might have a few things she wants to add, and then we'll turn it back to council.
Thank you. Jenny.
Good evening. I just wanted to point out a couple things that might have changed, or maybe the main thing that changed. With the auditor's approval, we have changed, so each CIP has its own GL number and its own line item within the budgets. So that has changed from last year. I think last year maybe it would just all be grouped under capital improvement for each department. So we decided that would be just an easier way to track, especially fixed assets during the audit. And there are actually 3 agenda items that were not in the budget. It's the EV charging station, the Hurricane Nicole grant, and Veterans Park. And like John said, if all those pass tonight, and we feel that this, the proposed budget can support all of these with money from contingencies, it'll affect the general fund, the CRA, and wastewater. And depending on those results, I'll get busy tomorrow changing what I need to in the budget to reflect those, and I'll get those out to you as soon as possible. And there's a couple other changes that, you always find things out after you've turned out the budget. We found out the actual amount for the resource officer at Cocoa Beach High School. I found out the proposed millage rates for a lot of the other cities. And then like in wastewater, we have an SRF project. It is completely SR funded, but it wasn't part of the budget. So those are the kind of corrections I can make after tonight. So Oh, and also what John said, we just found out about the county, their millage rates, so the CRA, the TIF adjustment is not in the proposed budget right now.
But it is in this worksheet that you handed out.
It is in the worksheet, right, but not in the proposed budget, but that will be corrected also after tonight. That's it.
I need a clarification.
Is that everything, Todd, finance team?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just wanted you to clarify. You gave what your tax increase would be, 100,000 to 400,000. That's annually, correct?
Yes,
Okay. Is this just the city tax? It doesn't include what we're going to get from the county?
Right.
Correct.
right.
All right, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're just going off our millage solely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, council, this is a workshop. Any questions at this time for city staff or things that we want to discuss? Feel free to jump in.
Mr. DeLeo, could you give me those numbers again on the increases per 100,000?
Sure. I'll round the number off. Okay. 100K, $14. 250K, $35. 300K, $42. 500K, $70. 70.
Thank you.
And Mayor, I should add, the millage of 3.5716 as proposed is, of course, a combined millage, which includes 3.5284 for the general and .0432 for the library.
Right, which is we put it together for you so you can see what the total is, but the .0432 is, there's virtually no impact there.
Okay, thank you. I got a question on the change. We hear some changes, and as soon as we get them, I guess I'm trying to understand when we said it could absorb it or could work within this budget, are we expecting these changes to affect the bottom line of the total consolidated fund of 37 million, if you were to add it all up, or 36,393,000? Page
Yes.
13, is that number going to change?
Yes.
Okay, do we have any idea on the direction it's going to change and
Well,
by how much?
I just kind of, if all three agenda items that would affect the budget pass, it would affect the general fund contingency. It would lower it by almost $77,000, bringing the general fund contingency down to 162.5, let's say. CRA contingency, and now that we found out about the county rate, the CRA contingency would also be lowered by $440,000. The big chunk of that's Veterans Park. And then wastewater would also have a contingency. I don't have that in front of me, but their contingency would be affected too. But that's what I mean by absorb it.
But the 36,393,000 would stay the same. You're just saying that the funds.
It would go up because that's showing revenues and expenses, so both would go up with these items.
If we were to add those three or four things up, it's
Exactly.
probably over $1 million, and you're, or maybe 500,000 on the low end, million on the high.
Yes,
Call it 750,000.
right. With Veterans Park is 750,000.
So that means this will probably, say, go to 37 million even, right? As just an example. We
Right.
expect it to increase,
Absolutely, by those three.
and we'll see, but somewhere. Okay. So that's
Yeah, it's kind of if you change one thing in the budget, it changes a lot. So probably
Yeah,
a lot of these pages would change depending on
Yeah, I
what hit
understood
us.
that, the line items would change. I just did not understand if numbers needed to be moved around or if we needed to adjust the total expenditures across all funds. So thank
Right,
you.
they would go up.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please.
In the general fund, is the Veterans Park says 155,000. And then in the next meeting, where did the 155,000 come from? If it's really 750,000?
Do you have the agenda item?
It
Okay.
is
In the next-
page 82.
It's in the next agenda.
Yes, page 82.
Oh, you want 82 of the budget?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And what is the item?
Park
Number-
11.
Okay, see,
Veterans Park redevelopment.
I see.
Yeah, Jenny, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda item in front of me, how that reads.
She's referring to
the-
the budget, page 82.
Right.
Because there's a cash forward amount of $155,000.
Right. Do you have that?
The agenda.
The
item?
agenda item might explain it a little bit more.
Well, it does.
Okay.
It proposes how.
And
we
I don't
can
have it in
get-
front of me, I'm sorry.
It proposes how we can pay for Veterans Memorial Park with that cash forward, an additional amount from the general fund, and then the lion's share from the CRA. But Councilmember Kellum's question is about where did the 155 come from? And it was cash forward from last year, so.
Yes, that's a good way to frame it, is that since it wasn't spent previously, and what would we incur for the next year, then that would be cash that was in the bank that we planned on using for the project. I mean, that's the best way to explain it. Yeah, and the thing about the Veterans Park too, is that there's gonna be an agenda item on it. There is a detailed explanation as to how we got to where we are and got to where we're going, okay? And it's very detailed, and it talks about the stuff Councilmember Kellum's talking about, the 155, where'd that come from? But it also talks about, too, how in order to complete the project, it's gonna need to be funded by the general fund and the CRA. And fortunately, we're gonna be able to do that. What's also, not to get too far off base, is that the bids that came in for that particular project, which I won't get into, but it is amazing how inflation has just kicked our butts. So, and you'll see that when we go over the item in the council meeting, but inflation is kicking our butts. And the more we push things down the road, the more we get our butts kicked. And we experience that with past projects. So, anyway,
If I could try to help
Yeah.
Councilmember Kellum a little bit more here. That item that's in the upcoming budget talks about the last 3 fiscal years' budgets and how this $500,000 project was 90,000 design, 410 construction. The 410 construction was then broken into 2 fiscal years. That carried forward through a couple years. That first 200 came off of the next presented budget because it was assumed that that would be spent in the current fiscal year. It wasn't. And then all that was left was the 210, and there were some expenses that came off of that related to the design, which brought this down to where it is, to 155. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay,
And when
so-
projects don't complete in the year of which we believe they would, or even if that part of the project doesn't complete, and it moves into the next year, hopefully staff has enough time to update the CIP or adjust those numbers so council could clearly see what's transpired. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Most of the time it happens, but sometimes it doesn't, which could end up having a question asked, like Councilman Councilmember Kellum asked about like, hey, what's up with the 155? So we will always be in a position where we have projects that start in one year and finish in the next, or projects slated to be completed by 30 September that aren't completed by 30 September. And what happens, in the months of August and September are critical because it does throw the budget into somewhat of a different direction, but it always could be adjusted because most of the money, when it's not spent, is sitting in our consolidated bank account.
It's important to think of a budget as a snapshot of where you are in time, and the days come where things change after that snapshot, and the snapshot is just a snapshot of that day. So things didn't get presented. It was, and in hindsight on that project, yeah, come October 1st, that $200,000 hadn't been spent, and it still hasn't been spent. Today, we've only spent $72,000 on the design work for the Veterans Park. There's still, of that $500,000, there's still $428,000 left that hasn't been spent, that we plan to spend. But to answer your question, why does this show 155? It's because the way it was shown in the various snapshots in time.
We also didn't have the bid in for the final, which that's part of the agenda item tonight. And you'll see this later, but the 155,000 plus the 170,000 that was budgeted for this current year that has not been spent will carry over. So we feel that the general fund could carry 325,000 of that agenda item, with the rest by the CRA.
Excuse me. Just one more question about that. On the same page, the resiliency division, the low impact development enhancement, 525,000. Is that what we're going to get the grant for? Is the other end of Veterans Park where?
Let me pull that up.
Yes, that 525,000, that project even taking place is contingent. That's a big
Yes.
chunk of money, is contingent on us receiving those grants.
Yes, that's fully funded by a grant.
If we get the grant.
If we get the
If we
grant,
get the
right, we won't
grants.
do it if
Yeah,
it's not.
Yeah,
if
we
don't get the
wouldn't, we
grant.
wouldn't do the $500,000 project if we don't get the grants, because that money is not available.
So that's part of, in the revenue, that's part of a grant
Okay. Thank you.
revenue.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Okay. Any other council members have any questions or want to discuss anything? Or just need a little time?
We could talk, Mayor, about the budget schedule as far as the workshops coming up. We do have more workshop opportunities for the council on this. Those dates are on page
17,
17. So we've got one in August coming up here. We can
I think.
plan around that. It's August 15th is the next budget workshop. There's the September 6th special council meeting at 5:30, which is the first public hearing on the budget. Then we've got the September 20th special council meeting at 6 o'clock, which is the second public hearing on the budget. So what we do here tonight has 3 more opportunities for discussion. And like we talked about earlier, the goal of this workshop is to set the proposed tentative millage rate, that knowing that it's a not-to-exceed number. And then if, after doing that, if there's any special things the council wants to dig into, well, we've got 3 more meetings to work into that and possibly work that down if the council wants to work that down.
Okay. Well, let's focus on that. Let's focus on the millage rate. And we're going to take this up in the regular council meeting too, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, understood. And we can go back to the budget, but the increase, I mean, is it appropriate to talk about the language in the resolution?
Sure.
Because it's very helpful to follow the rollback rates by just reading the resolution that we drafted. So call this a reference from the workshop. If we go to agenda item one, it's budgetary item. Resolution number 2023-13. I'm not there yet. But the actual resolution, page 1, it explains in the section 1, kind of sums up everything around the millage rate, and we can go back to the budget, but from what I understand, and what was stated tonight is the 3.5716 mills is the combined, as we call it, total millage for both the general government and the library. And so the rollback rate is for the combined rollback rate is 3.2517. Okay, so those two numbers are important. The difference, so if we chose the rollback rate, that would be comparative to what we obtained last year in revenue. Certainly, probably wouldn't be exactly the same, very unlikely, but close. And the difference, or the, yes, and have we just keep the tax rate the same, we'd actually have to lower it to 3.2517. This increase is calculated at 8.9568%, just under 9%. That percentage change, are we calculating the change in rate right there? And if we are, is that the increase that we have to advertise? This might be a question for Anthony. And so,
You don't
or
have-
is it on the total revenue?
Sorry, you don't have to advertise the percentage over the rollback rate in our advertisements. It just has to be in the resolution.
What is the percentage increase, city attorney, that we have to? Am I getting this mixed up with something? I think back in 2017, the percentage needs to be included, not advertised, in the resolution. Maybe that's what I said. Is that correct?
Percentage, if there's a percentage increase above the rollback rate,
Yes.
that needs to be in the resolution and also needs.
Okay. Thank you. And this resolution, this percentage here is taking the difference in the rollback rate and the proposed new rate. Is that how we calculate the percentage to satisfy that? I think it's state law. Or do we take the total revenues that this rate would achieve in millage, which is?
It has gotten very complicated, but the state actually provides, right, a form
Right, and that's,
with a lot of the
yes,
numbers.
and I send what our advertisement, I send it to the trim office, and then they okay the ad to make sure that we're fulfilling all our obligations. And that's why I didn't have to do the percentage change. It had to be in the resolution. It did not have to be in the ad last year. What does have to be in the ad is a percentage of, if your expenditures are going up, that percentage is what is in the ad. So, but I always send, and they encourage you to do so. You know, you send your ad to the trim office.
So you might have answered my question. It's the change in in expenditures as a percentage change in expenditure increases must be advertised?
Yes,
Do we have?
and that's even if you don't have a millage increase.
So, okay, this rate that was calculated by.
This rate is, right, this is different for what the resolution has to have in it.
Just this just has to show the percentage difference. It has to show on here the percentage difference between rollback and what you're proposing. So that's what this does, and then what goes in the paper is another another item based on expenditures that's in the paper. And we never put it in the paper until we send it to the state anymore. I mean, we've done that the last couple of years, because you know what? We don't need the state coming back saying, oh, you know what, you put it in the paper wrong, so you guys are host. Well, we let them validate it and say, you know what? Your advertisement looks good. And then we go, good, now we're good to go. So we never leave any chance that the city gets it wrong. Let it be the state.
Well, I'm just trying to understand, taxes are increasing by just under 9%. Is that, we can definitely say the tax rate is increasing by 9%, but depending on how people interpret tax increases, the revenue increase, which we calculate in that table in the budget book, in the summary every year where you show the revenues, that'll be a different percentage, right? It is.
It might be
I think
slightly.
that's according to the table that you provided.
Yeah, let's go to that page in the budget.
That I think is a great idea, because,
Is it page 82?
and we're getting back to the budget book.
Yeah, that'll make it easier.
82?
Let me see.
Yep.
Is it
Okay,
82?
so,
No, it's not 82. It's in the general information. It's going to be
it's page 78.
78, Jim.
So, thank you. So as we can see here, the rate change is calculated in the second column to the right, and the column all the way to the right is the change in revenues, right? And so those percentages are different. So this year, we have a 4% increase on this page.
Right, but that's over our rate from last year. That's not over the rollback rate.
Right. I want to know what rate matters.
The one from last year.
I think the rollback rate matters. And I want to go back to our city attorney. The rollback rate, the change from the rollback rate is what we are legally required to communicate, whether it be public notice or put in the ordinance or resolution. Both, I think, according to you, right?
Right, during the millage hearing, yes, you're
At a
required
public-
to tell the citizens what their tax rate is, and if it goes above the rollback rate, you have to tell the citizens the percentage increase, the millage rate will be above the rollback, right, for purposes of the hearing. Now, with that said, the legislature in their infinite wisdom, when the millage rate is in excess of 100% of the rollback, meaning you're above the rollback, then you have to notice in the newspaper a notice of proposed tax increase, and the basic form of the ad requires the city to actually state in dollars the revenue, like the revenues that that will be levied based on your proposed rate, right? So your hearing's all about this millage rate. Your ad is all about disclosing the revenues that will be
Thank you.
raised.
Very helpful.
Is that
Right,
correct?
right.
Thank
And
you.
the resolution requires that you show the percent change from rollback to what the proposed is. Page 78 is showing the change based on history from year to year. That's what that's doing, exactly what it's doing on page 78. So that's not connected to the way the state says. This is our internal.
But let me just, because I'm watching the time, and I think
Okay.
other council member, this percentage change to the right is the change in revenue from last year. I think that is what is required to be noticed, because the year that I referenced earlier was 16-17, or maybe it was 17-18. Yep, go up to 2017-18. I remember that year. We advertised a change or drafted a resolution in rate, and then we had to catch it, and then we had to go back out and say, no, we need to communicate the percentage change in revenues. So for the sake of this budget workshop and pushing an ad valorem rate forward, the proposed millage rate of 3.5716, according to this table, will be a 15.66% increase in revenues to our
Right.
city compared to last year's actual revenues.
Yes.
Okay, so when somebody asks, how much are we increasing taxes? 15.66% is one way to answer it.
But wouldn't that include the increase in assessed value? I mean, it's factored off of assessed value.
Yes, it's
Yes.
factored off the new assessed value, which went up
Right.
13%.
And that's part of the whole equation. If you look in the column, it says percent increase, the decrease in assessed value. Well, 11.15% from 2023 to 2024, 1.7 billion and 1.9 billion. You have to take that into account, and you can't just look at the 1566 and compartmentalize that in your mind and say that's the change in revenues, because those numbers have been affected by the gross taxable value that's increased. So, and that's why we go to the state, and they're the ones that validate our numbers when it comes to what needs to be accurately represented in the ad. And that's what we do. That's what we did last year. That's what we did the year before.
But in the numbers, I mean, as Councilman Willis indicated, that includes the increase in assessed value, right, of previously existing,
Yes.
right, or existing
Yes.
properties. But the other part of the equation is there's new development, right?
Yes.
That comes online, that gets taxed for the first time, and that bumps the revenues, right, anticipated in your next fiscal year, right?
That's correct.
And
There's a line on the
So the
420.
revenue increase that the city gets from taxing, right, not only is the millage rate important, but how much the assessed value went up, how much new development came online, right? Even though you keep your millage rate flat, your revenues go up.
And there's and that's the variable there that's important that you got to take into account. Because, new building, new construction, all that stuff, those numbers are add to the gross taxable value.
Right, and add more revenue,
Yes,
right? And
absolutely.
that additional revenue, regardless of what you do to your millage rate, gets factored into this tax increase because more revenue's coming in.
So a more accurate way to get to where I think the mayor's going would be to apply the 3.716 to last year's total assessed taxable valuation, and then look at that percentage increase. And I don't think we posed that, that's not in here.
I don't think, I think you're,
It's
that's
like
a
if-
bit mixing apples with oranges.
Well,
there.
if all things were equal to last year's taxes that were collected, it would apply to the last year's taxable assessed value.
That's what rollback is.
Right, but we don't provide that percent
But,
change.
but, yeah,
I think the state of Florida figured it out partially. I know it's not perfect. There's two numbers that matter. The rollback rate, because that solves for close to a number that would achieve the similar revenues as last year based on the adjusted increase in value, not including new taxes, as I understand it. And so this number there's going to be, if any new development happens, will increase, because how would we even know? Now, if you're going back last year and adding in the new revenue and, the actuals, that's different. But the 4% increase, I think that's interesting, because that's last year's rate, but with the 11.1% increase in assessed value, they had to create a rollback rate lower to adjust that for that increase to show, because it's very deceiving to residents and it's very complicated. with the millage and how it's applied and the change in values and how they approach it. And so this does simplify it for me, at least. And it's a 15.6% increase in revenues, and then there's almost, I think, a 9% increase in the rate. And I think we need to check the math on that rate. I was just punching it in. I'm getting a much higher percentage. I'm getting 9%. So I don't know how we're solving for the increase, but back to that resolution, when I was plugging that in, that doesn't, my math is different. My last question, if I was to ask, how much are we increasing taxes? I said 15.66% is how much of an increase in expenditures or revenues that's going to come in above and beyond what we had last year, not including new development. So it can even go higher. Oh, and your rate increased 4% over last year, and that's about 9% over the rollback rate. So it's about a 9% increase in the rate if you had to compare it to last year and adjust. But we're going to get 15.5% more revenue than we did last year. I think that's...
Which is very fortunate for us, since to achieve what council has asked us to do is represented in this budget. And I feel very fortunate that the gross taxable value went from 1.7 billion to 1.9 billion, because if it didn't, half of what council wanted in this budget probably would not even been realized this year. But what we can do is, if there's a, you get a question or whatever, what I will do tomorrow morning is I will send a resolution, and I would send the resolution and our numbers to the state and let them validate it if there seems to be a question. There's no question, though, on what we want to get accomplished tonight in terms of setting, which we must do in this meeting, and that's set a millage rate so we can move forward.
Well, we do that after 6.
At
We don't need
6,
to do
yeah.
it in this meeting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's going to be the main
Yeah.
objective. But all these numbers, I feel comfortable with these numbers. I don't see anything wrong with the resolution. I haven't done it any different. But when you bring up the aspect of what's on page 78, the interpretation there, as long as those numbers are correct, and nothing's been done since 1986 to 2024, I don't think we've changed the way we've computed anything, so I feel confident in that. But so, once you pass the resolution tonight, if council wants me to go to the state tomorrow for any questions, Jeff, I'd be happy to do that.
The reason I was telling you about the resolution is I hope before we get to it, you double check the math on that change so that we can fix it and pass. And that's not a reason that it holds up. I calculated all 3 changes in the library, the general. Maybe you're doing it differently than I am, but as a percentage, it just was off. And this isn't the first time we've been here. It's okay. I just think that we need to check it. As far as this millage rate, it's a high increase for me. So I do think we need to take the very helpful memo that you put together, and what we're calling a deficit, I would just say, hold off. We need to figure out a way to get this down. And Jenny, I think if the council doesn't have questions, you said that you updated the millage rates as a comparison on the page before.
I'm sorry, I said I would need to do that.
Okay, so on page 80, the millage rate increase, we've got basically all cities that have an asterisk
Right.
is not
I did not-
updated for this year.
Correct, I did not
Okay.
have those on June 30th. I actually just got most of them this week.
Okay, because
I have them with me.
I'm very happy that we're at third, and I know
Yep.
that that's a big thing that we say is, hey,
Yep.
I know it's an increase, but we're the third lowest, and I just want to make sure.
And we would remain, yes.
Yeah.
With the new ones, we do remain that.
Okay, council, we don't need to vote on anything in this workshop, but That's all I have for right now. Good? Okay. We got about 10 minutes. If there's not anything else, we can adjourn
Divide that by
and
that, right?
roll into the meeting. City manager, any final comments?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. With that, meeting adjourned. Thank you.